Hey everyone, I'm here for day 2 of Scipy sprints, and I wanted to take a chance now to do a bit of a screencast to show everybody how to open a PR and also a little bit how to navigate the different GitHub checks and which inevitably end up being related to our automated testing checks and our static typing checks in Prefect. Because I think, especially for people who are new to open source, but even if you're just new to the Prefect project, it's kind of its own configuration, and knowing exactly what we applied in terms of code quality checks can kind of feel like like a barrier once you have figured out what you think is all of your pull requests, and now there's like all these other red X's on GitHub, right, that are blocking merge, and maybe maintainers are telling you like, oh, fix your this, fix your that. Right, so I'm gonna walk through a little bit of that, and even though this is, again, today is day 2 for Scipy 2020 sprint, so even though I'm kind of giving this talk for that, I think this is gonna be pretty useful to contributors in general, so hopefully other people find this useful too. Cool, so I've got up on the screen here the development overview page in our docs, which actually has a lot of this information, but just kind of like split up in some different spots, so I'm gonna walk through it myself. And then back here I have a tab with the conda environment that we set up, this dev environment directions here we went through yesterday. So that's where my terminal is over here. Let me just double check. Yeah, so I mentioned that I have a lot of copies of Prefect on my computer at this point. So adding on to yesterday, I created this directory scipy dev prefect, and I git cloned, just like the directions say over here in the development overview, the repo for Prefect, and that's where my terminal is right now, right? So just setting the stage a little bit, because what I'm going to show is how we actually go through the process of opening a pull request, and then take a look at some of that. So what I actually worked on most of yesterday was a separate repo to try and make a binder for Prefect tutorials to live. So we have a bunch of tutorials, a major tutorial, and then these advanced tutorials, right? On our Prefect docs, we actually have an examples directory in the repo too that also has some flows in it. And it's definitely nice and has, these cool like little copy things too, so you can pull it onto your own computer, but definitely get the sense that it would be nice if people could run this without installing everything on their own computer, maybe from their phone, I don't know. But if Scipy people definitely know this binder is a super popular way to release code that Jupyter Notebooks really, and some other stuff that can be hosted on this binder service, and then you can go interact with it there. So it takes a little bit to start up. That's what this little like woo thing is about. But this is what I've been working on in the back. So this is actually like a totally separate repo at this point. But what I think I want to do for showing you all the pull requests is I'm going to take this badge that is the one that I clicked on to get to this page, and include it in our docs in the normal Prefect repo. So I'm just going to like pull this whole little badge and put a little like, hey, you should go to my binder in the normal repo. So again, I'm in a totally different repo in my VS Code right now, but I'm going to go open in VS Code. Let's see, that's file, open. I don't know if I opened it. Oh, here we go. My desktop Scipy dev prefect directory. Make sure I have the right one, right? So this is now the same as where we are over here. Same file, same stuff going on. Actually, you'll remember from yesterday that what we did to show that I had this version, this specific copy of Prefect that I'm showing in VS Code that's at this directory, and installed in editable mode in my virtual environment, is that I put in this cute little hello, so that if I dropped into Python, I could import Prefect and it would say hello Scipy to me. So that just triple checking that we're in the right spot. And also we can get rid of this because that's not a meaningful addition here. Let's, totally revert that, discard. Great. Okay, so what I want to do is make a change to basically maybe in this getting started page, maybe even in first steps, I'll just start off putting on like or you can, you know, run some of these tutorials in Binder and then put the little link, right? So I'm just going to drop that in, and I kind of know where all the docs are, but basically I'm kind of backing into it from seeing that what this URL is, /core/getting started first steps.html. That gives me a tip that I need to go into the docs directory here, and then core, that's the first, oh, how convenient, it's right there. The first part of the path here, then getting started, then first steps.md, right? Okay, so this is what the docs looks like. This doc here looks like in, it's just regular markdown basically with some, with potentially a little extra view press fun in it. So again, super basic. I'm just gonna just put something in here. We can also, you know, work on this throughout the next days between me and the rest of the Prefect crew of where exactly we want to put all of these. I'm just going to open the PR at this point. We're not going all the way to the end. But I'm going to say you can also run some interactive tutorials with a hosted Jupyter lab instance on Binder by clicking here, right? Okay, so something like that. Probably this is going to render really weird with this badge, and we'll deal with that later. So now I have a change in this directory. I'm using VS Code kind of to do some of my Git stuff. So that's what this view is, but you could use regular command line Git too, right? So if we look over here, Git status, I have this change that I need to stage. And the important point that I kind of want to interject about here is that when we are developing on Prefect, you will want to actually fork Prefect and push to your fork and then open your pull request from your fork. So that is described a little bit in the development overview. It's kind of like buried though, I feel, in terms of where you may like first look. You're like, oh, I need to do this thing and let me get going. And then maybe you don't see, in order to submit code changes to Prefect, please do these things, right? So there's some link outs here, but I'm gonna do it over here. So the situation for me is that for this Git repo that I have cloned here, I have one remote. So there's one remote version of this repository. This is like Git stuff, but there's one remote version of this repository that I am like communicating with. So when I do git push, when I do git pull, I'm implicitly using this origin remote, which is at this location, which is the like the official repo of Prefect, right? The one that's in the Prefect HQ organization. So I happen to work for Prefect, so I actually do have push permissions to this, but most people don't, right? Most people don't have push permissions to this. So you could, even if you didn't do all of these steps, at some point you might try and push to a branch on Prefect and it would be like, deny, do you have access, write access to this repository? The answer would be no. So you would need to do this step at that point later anyways. So what we want to do is add a new remote for our fork. And in my case, I have forked this repo before, since I'm like Prefect's biggest fan, right? But if you haven't, then basically you can come up to github.com/prefecthq/prefect, right? Go to the normal repo and then click this fork button. And then it will ask you, if you have more than one organization that you're associated with in GitHub, it'll ask you what organization you want to fork it to. In your case, you probably want to do it to your personal username. That's what I did. That's why this is at lauraloren/prefect instead of like some other organization/prefect. And then a cute little animation happens. You may have forked stuff before, so you know it, but it's still cute. And then you'll get a page like this. And the effect is that now we have a GitHub remote address that is associated with us that also has our like write permissions associated with it. So this is where we're actually going to make our changes to. So I need to connect the fact that this remote exists on the planet and that I have a copy of Prefect here that doesn't know that this remote exists on the planet, right? It only knows about origin. So I'm going to add a remote with git remote add. I'm pretty sure the syntax is that I need to give it a name. That's the other part that I'm missing. Git remote add, I'm pretty sure it's the name and then the address of the remote, the location of the remote. Let's see if that works. Promising. Git remote -v is always the way to check. Okay, so here you can now see that the output has changed, right? So before I only had origin, now I have Laura Lorenz and I have origin. So the situation now is that in my current Git repo, I can now specify anything that I'm used to using on the Git CLI to interact with a remote, like git push, git pull, git fetch, for example. Now, by default, they all are going to try and do that to origin, but I can specify which remote I want to use with things like git fetch Laura Lorenz, git push Laura Lorenz, git pull Laura Lorenz, for example. So if I specify what remote I want to use, then I can change the behavior of all of those git commands to interact with a different remote, in my case, mine. So I'm going to, for example, do git fetch Laura Lorenz to pull references to all of these branches that exist in the Laura Lorenz remote. And in my case, most of these are kind of like the same from whenever it was that I forked Prefect, but hopefully it's kind of like clear in the details here that as I make branches on the Laura Lorenz fork, they'll be fetchable, pushable, pullable from this remote, but they won't exist on the origin because I don't have push permissions. You don't have push permissions to it. And so they will sort of like diverge in that sense. So right now, these are all basically things that also exist on the normal Prefect. So you will see, branches that exist in Prefect 2 because you pulled from there in the first place. But then as you start annotating this with more of your own branches, then you'll see some different stuff in here. So now what I want to do is create a branch because I'm on master, right? And it's not cool. It's not cool to commit directly to master. So I'm going to check out with -B, which is going to create a new branch for me. Something that gives a name to this activity that I am trying to do, which is to add binder tutorial references. So let's call it that. Add binder tutorial references, right? So if this was for something that had an actual issue number, you should, in general, plan to add like issue dashes or something else, whatever the number is. It's more convention. It doesn't actually matter, but it just keeps everything a little bit cleaner. I definitely expect things to kind of be associated like that. So if I press enter here, then now I switch to a new branch. You can see that my little prompt shows me that I'm in a different branch called this. So I can check to see what my status. This is like the normal Git stuff. I could also do this over here, see that firststeps.md is not staged for commit. I could add it, right? Docs core getting started first steps to my stage. Check. Now this is in changes to be committed. This stuff it might be a little small on your screen, but this is now in a different tab called stage changes. So I'm going to, commit this with a message that says something that I did, right? So add binder badge to, where did I put this? Getting started, did section, right? I don't have myself set as an author yet. So let me fix that really quick. And I also didn't read the directions. Sorry. What? Your name and email address were configured automatically based on your name and hostname. Please check that they are accurate. You can suppress this message, blah, blah, blah. Run the following command, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Right. So I didn't set this up yesterday. So this is not necessarily what I wanted to show you, but I am now editing my my git config. Email Laura@prefect.io for this repo. Let's see if that was correct. I do this a couple times a week, it feels like, so. Okay, so in my case, I've chosen to set my git config locally instead of globally. I don't think that's actually the sort of how people normally do it, but sometimes it's basically become a habit when sometimes I'm working on GitHub repos like as my professional self, as Laura@prefect.io, and sometimes I'm working on stuff as my like personal self with like my personal email. So I've just gotten in the habit of always setting my git config locally, but I haven't gotten into the even better habit of always setting it the first time I make a commit or the first time that I set anything up. So then sometimes I commonly get into the awkward situation where GitHub shows me as just a gray Octocat because it doesn't know who I am. If my name's just Laura Lorenz and my email is laura@laurasmacbookpro.local, that isn't associated with my GitHub username. So random aside, but FYI, that's how I live my life in terms of my Git config. And you can too if you want to, but you may look as awkward as I do sometimes. All right, so I've amended my commit. And the effect of that is that now this commit has my proper author stuff associated with it. That's what that whole detour was about. Okay, so the next important part is that we want to push this branch not to the origin remote, but to my Laura Lorenz remote, right? The whole situation is that this is one that I want to open as a pull request from my fork. So this is the situation where, again, any of our Git commands that we want to interact with a remote, we need to specify which remote we want if we're living in a life where we have more than one remote. So I want to push this, but to Laura Lorenz instead. And then since I've never pushed it before or published it, then, oh good, here we go. To GitHub Laura Lorenz /prefect.git, named it after whatever my branch is. So we should see this over here now. Here we go. Add binder tutorial references has recent pushes. Woo. Okay, so the point here is that this is this branch. Now this GitHub changed like a week or two ago, right? And this looks very different to me. It's kind of weirding me out. Sorry, got distracted by that. But now this is our normal thing that we expect to see that this has been pushed to, again, my fork. We see that it got pushed to GitHub Laura Lorenz /prefect.git. So the one that's at my fork. It's a new branch named after what I called it here. So happy days. So we can go ahead and come here to compare and pull request. And this is just the normal pull request. Here, let me give it a little bit more space here. But this is just normal pull request interface on GitHub. But you'll see that since we're working with a fork, there's a lot more drop downs here than you may be used to if you've been using GitHub to make pull requests to repositories that you own. So here it's making a specification that I'm coming from my fork, Laura Lorenz /prefect. In that fork, there is a branch called add binder tutorial references, right? The one we just pushed. And that I want to open a pull request against Prefect HQ master. So you can, of course, change all of these depending on your situation. If maybe you're on a fork and you're trying to make some suggestions into some other branch that's on Prefect, then maybe you would change this base. But this is the general gist. In the case of Prefect, you'll make your pull request. I said PRs and pull requests at the same time somehow. You'll make your pull requests into master so that you're going to say, please accept these changes into master. So we can leave this, and this is correct. So now it's just a matter of changing up your post in terms of your pull request content, the actual request itself. So again, a couple tips. This is all more GitHub stuff, but if this was closing an issue, like this crazy issue number, I would recommend throwing it at the top and also somewhere in the pull request body. This is GitHub magic, but basically GitHub is then going to have the ability to auto-close stuff if this pull request gets merged. Again, in our case, we're not doing something that's off of the issue, so it doesn't really matter, but I just want to give you that tip because it's a nice one. And then I only have one commit. This is also GitHub magic, but since I only have one commit, it just throws that in the title here. If you don't like that title, then you should change it. I think overall, this isn't just about this commit. It's going to be about adding this binder to this binder's links to the docs in general, like everywhere that's relevant. We'll probably do a couple more passes. I will personally do a couple more passes to add it in more places. So I'm going to actually rename this to add binder tutorial references in Prefect docs, right? Because that's like the general gist of what I'm actually doing. And then we have a template here in Prefect that gives you some guidance of how to fill this out to make this most helpful, including some checkboxes that you'll have to check off for if you have added new tests if appropriate, if you've added the changelog entry, if you've updated doc strings, blah, 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 blah. So that's stuff that you'll need to check. So we can come back to that a little bit later too, but I'm not going to check it right now because I'm not really ready for review. And then I'll just put a couple of notes here, you know, work in progress, but adding in some of the tutorial reference, adding in some links to, here, let's make it working on adding in some links to the new binder tutorial in places it would be useful to new people reading the Prefect docs, right? So that's the general gist. And I personally, especially, I'm going to open this as a draft PR. So I personally will change this original post with updates as things are going if I open something as a draft PR. And then once I open something as a fully ready to review PR, then I'll probably give updates as comments and like tag the relevant people to try and keep it a little bit more clear. But it's kind of up to you how you want to do that. And I think this is important because binder tutorials are more interactive and easier for new users, and they should know that they exist, right? And so yeah, just fill this out with whatever stuff that you need. There's a little check mark here for allow edits by maintainers. This is ironic because I am a maintainer, so I could go edit it anyways. But since you are opening a pull request from a fork, this is what gives the power to people who are code owners on Prefect, HQ/Prefect, to push changes to your fork. And this might be useful so they can make like minor edits, like if some of your static checks don't work, they could actually just fix them for you or whatever. So I would recommend checking it off, but if you have some big reason not to, then you definitely could not. That's just the point of what that checkbox is. And then there's this little drop down here. I mentioned I'm going to create a draft pull request. And the effect of this is it gives a little like visual. It's kind of grayed out in the pull request list on the Prefect side. So it gives a little visual that it's a work in progress. It explicitly says draft. It also doesn't officially ping the code owners, the maintainers of the repo, like with an email notification. They'll definitely see it because they/I check the pull request list pretty often, at least weekly, but also more like every day. And we have also GitHub's talking to us in Slack all the time, so we definitely know. But this is going to kind of get across that this is a work in progress by me. And one other tip you can do that a lot of people like to do is add work in progress in the title somewhere, and you can delete that later whenever you want, but that's the idea. So all of that to say that once we've got this as pretty as we want it, but we don't have to make it too pretty because it's a draft, we can click this button, draft pull request. And this is now, you can see this is like the rendering for something that's in a draft. This is saying that I, Laura Lorenz, want to merge one commit into Prefect master from my fork and my branch on that fork, right? So this is the whole kind of setup. So nice thing about opening a pull request, Circle CI / all of our, Circle CI is one service that we use. That's this one with this logo. It is representing Circle CI. But we're also using AppFair and Netlify to run checks against, to run automated tests and automated checks against your pull request. So this will start running the tests and running the static checks with MyPy, the static checks with Black, the static checks with Flake8 for you. So that's nice. And then we can also go and see the details about if they worked or not from here too. So this is nice because it kind of offboards it a little bit. It's all stuff that you can run locally too, which I also recommend. We can actually show that too, what's happening here and over here. But I just want to point out that it's also nice to make the computer do it, right? So if I wanted to run some of these checks, these are all organized into kind of these top level things. Run tests, right? Like what does that mean? Check code style in docs. So these are running a couple of different things. And when we get more details about them, we can check on all of them. But the overall overview of what's going on is kind of split up between these docs about code style, which explains about our formatting, our doc string formatting, requests / requirements. Some of them have tests associated with them, and MyPy typing. And also in this other one, testing, which talks a little bit about testing and running tests, and the fact that our CI tool is running those tests in a couple different environments. And also running some documentation tests against our API docs to make sure your doc strings are set up properly. So, that's kind of all buried in here. If you really want to know the details, right, you can find it in circle CI config.yaml, right? There's this quite long circle YAML that will show you all sorts of stuff and details about how those checks run, including, I mean, to the point of like the CD part of it, that some of these jobs in here are actually like pushing things to, for example, Docker Hub once something is merged into master. So definitely a good place to check out if you're interested. But I'll give you the general gist here, so don't worry. So let's just talk about some of the things that are running back here if you were going to run them in your terminal. So first off, PyTest. PyTest is going to run the automated tests. There's a whole bunch about PyTest of like how to run it with different flags and annotations, blah, blah, blah. Probably the easiest thing for you to do is if you were adding tests yourself or you were touching some aspect of the code yourself, you could just run the unit tests for that section as you're developing is probably like the fastest way to turn around. If you run PyTest and like this and just press enter, which you should, but there's definitely a lot of tests that are going to run. It's going to take a while, so I wouldn't do that like at the very when you're really in the weeds of everything. But it is a good sanity check to check every once in a while, or to push to your draft PR and let Circle CI worry about it. That's kind of your choice. I feel like I'm kind of showing my colors here of how I normally handle that. But let's say that you want to run. Let's see. A while ago, I was working on results a lot. So let's run the results tests. These ones, this is also a nice pick because they're really fast because they're unit tests against a base class. But this is kind of what the output for PyTest looks, if everything goes well, right? But it will tell you some stuff. It will just give a little bit of output. You can change this to verbose output, which I'm pretty sure is probably just -v. Live check. Yeah, so here's all the tests that are actually running. It'll give us the name of all of them instead of just turning them all into little dots. But this is the gist of what's happening for pretty much all of the checks under this run test banner. It's basically going to run PyTest, but it's going to run them under different circumstances. So run PyTest with Python 3.6, run PyTest with Python 3.7, run PyTest with Python 3.8, right? Run PyTest in an environment that doesn't have any extras installed. So when I run PyTest here, I'm running it against every dependency I have in scipy dev-env, right? That's the version of Python that I'm using. But I could have, through development, installed all sorts of random stuff in here that isn't actually explicitly specified in the setup.py for Prefect. So if somebody else tried to run my code, they wouldn't have the dependencies and they would get frustrated because there would be import errors all over the place. So we have a check in the way that we run our test that's going to see if we can actually do everything that test exists for with a totally vanilla version of Prefect. So that's a little side there, but that's an example of why we have so many different environments that we're testing in to try and protect against those types of mistakes where things aren't imported properly. And then, of course, we officially support 3.6 to 3.8, so we need to test on all of those environments. So that's the idea of straight up tests. So that's what this line is working on. On check code style and docs, you can see we've succeeded along as I've been just chatting everything up about tests. But for check code styles and docs, this is going to do a couple steps here. Most importantly, the ones from code style, which is going to test black. It's actually also going to test another thing called flake8, which isn't listed in these docs right here, but we can add that in shortly. Flake8, and then it's also going to test against MyPy. So there's some directions here of how you can run all of these. And since you installed Prefect in dev style, right, we pip install -e the dev, not distribution, but the dev extras for our local editable install Prefect. You have MyPy installed in the environment that you installed your dev version of Prefect. So we can, as is recommended here, run MyPy source and see if there's any errors. This tells us success, no issues. MyPy is going to check against type annotation. So basically our code is statically typed using MyPy. So if you didn't put annotations on maybe a new class, or you subclassed a class and annotated something differently than its interface implies, that type of stuff, it's going to check against. So this is good for checking to make sure that this caught some mistakes that I made with some base classing, subclassing stuff a couple weeks, months, probably months ago, like 2 or 3 months ago, again, about results. So it definitely has its uses for sure, but that's how that works. And then for black, and again, it's not mentioned here, but flake 8, we can run flake 8 on our source code too. So flake 8 is going to check, especially for things like imports being like in a nice order, style stuff related to that. And then black is a formatter as well that does kind of like less things overall than flake 8 does. So that's why we added in flake 8 to kind of do a couple extra things that we liked. But black is kind of like a very common Python standard at this point to try and take away some of the decision making for style on some basic things. So when you run black in this recommended way, you'll either get output that says that it reformatted stuff for you, or happy emojis that there's nothing to change. So we made a pretty minor change, so all of these things checked out pretty easily, including the test. But that's how you would run all of these on your side. Again, these are all happening over here. If we click into, for example, this details button for, oops, I wanted to click it for the check code. There we go. For the check code, style, and docs, then this will take us to another view in GitHub that tells us what the checks were. And if we click even further into this individual job, you'll have to authenticate with your GitHub credentials. I already am. But it will show you the output from Circle CI. So this is the stuff that Circle CI did, right? This is inside app.circleci.com. So we can see the output of its run MyPy step. We can see the output of its run black step. We can see the output of its flake 8 step. And relevantly, we can also see what command it literally ran. Again, this is something that you can read for yourself in this config.yaml. So somewhere in here, there's a MyPy, right? Here's the actual run MyPy command as configured in Circle CI. That's what's happening right here, right? Run MyPy, the same thing. But that's how you can kind of line things up if you're feeling like connecting the dots for any reason. And so if you need to see the output from Circle CI, like if you had a red X instead of a green check mark for one of these things, this is the place that you would want to go to see what the output actually was. So that's what's going on there. The next nice thing is that we also get previews of our docs, right? So I made a change to the docs in this example. I put this little button here, right? So I'm not running my local docs environment. I'm looking at the deploy preview that I got from having opened that pull request and triggered all of the automated jobs that Prefect is configured to do on pull request to its repo. So here we can see that certainly the front end team is not going to like what I did here, because this button is very awkward. Even said you should click here, right? That's so embarrassing. So we'll have to figure out how we exactly want to stick this badge or not stick this badge in here. But this is a good start for me in terms of I at least have the PR set up. I got my fork all set up. I know how I can look at this deploy preview and send it to my friends, my front end friends, to ask them for tips. And I can keep adding commits. This is the next important part. I can keep adding commits the same way we did earlier to my branch on my fork, right? And they are going to keep showing up in my pull request. So when I want to make changes to this pull request, I just do my normal operations of pushing to my forks add binder tutorial references branch. And then if you navigate to this PR, you'll see that it gets added in here. We'll rerun all of these checks. So we'll rerun your Netlify deploy preview. So, you can make your changes and keep sending them to your front end friends, or, whatever it is. I'm doing a docs one right now. You might be doing something else. But yeah, you can just keep operating like that. The last couple bits here that I would mention is I'm not going to get to the point where I'm ready to actually open this PR in this stream, but when you are ready, here it is. There is a button called Ready for Review if you opened it in a draft form that will convert this to a just like normal pull request, I guess. Right now I'm in a special status, right? Draft pull request. This will change it to a normal pull request. So as mentioned before, if I press this button, it will change this little, button to be green and say that it's a pull request. It will also auto request reviews from all of the code owners of Prefect, which at this point is 3 people. So I can still request reviews from whoever I want. Like maybe I could say like, hey Chris, look at my pull request, right? He's getting pinged now. He's on Pacific time, so sorry Chris. But this is totally valid way to request reviews from people through just the GitHub interface, including while stuff is in a draft or after you open it, and if you don't see the person that you want as a reviewer because they aren't like automatically requested as a reviewer, you can do that here too. And there's a bunch of cool GitHub interface utilities to like re-request reviews and request new reviewers and blah blah blah. So that's more of like a GitHub experience, and it's pretty intuitive in terms of the UI, so I wouldn't, it's not too rough, but just FYI that exists over here. And the effect of turning to ready for review is going to ask everybody else, and it's kind of like the official tip to us that like you want somebody to look at it. If you opened your pull request ahead of time, you can definitely comment on it and say that it's a work in progress. You can put work in progress in the top to let us know. Or if the case is that you do want reviews, even though it is a work in progress, feel free to say that too. And if things are changing over time, then just ping whoever, either through this reviewers tool or in a comment like at mention us, and just keep us up to date on what you're thinking. Feel free to over communicate on your PR in terms of what you're thinking, or hang out with us in Slack too is totally an option too. But that's the general communication tips about your pull request. All right, so I think that's basically it in terms of what I wanted to get across. So hopefully this helped get you to your first PR, or get you with less pain to maybe your second, third, fourth PR, who knows. And in any case, I'm going to keep working on this one for a while now, try and get more binder tutorials together and make sure that it's showing up in everywhere that we want people to see them in Prefect. And then other than that, check us out on Slack, talk to us on GitHub, talk to us, right now, again, we're at Scipy 2020, so talk to me in the Scipy 2020 Slack chat channel if you want to talk specifically about Scipy, but otherwise, we're around all the time, right? Open source life. So I will see you there. Bye, everybody.